I appreciate everyone showing up for my self-deprecating talk about my horrible personal failures. This is Learning from Failure, Tales of Incident Response Gone Wrong. I am Nick Leghorn. I'm currently the manager, one of the managers of Information Security Engineering, and Indeed, just kind of the catch-all term they use for us. I'm specifically around governance, risk, compliance, and development. But that's not my current role, or that's not what I'm talking about today. I have a long and storied history of working at MSPs, hosting providers, you name it, I've probably been in IT support there. And a lot of that time is in incident response. And so these are some stories that I've gathered over the years about where that incident response process hasn't really gone to plan. First and foremost, quick disclaimer. None of the stuff we're talking about today occurred in Indeed. Names and specific details have been obscured to protect customer confidentiality. We don't want to get anyone in trouble. One of the things I want to talk about today is this idea of the zero blame-free retrospective property, right? When something goes wrong, as the slide says, you just paid someone a very expensive lesson, and you don't want that to go to waste. So this idea of having a blame-free retrospective, where after an event happens, you all come together, there's no, this person did this, so therefore they're a bad person. That doesn't happen. That's not a good idea. Having an open and honest discussion about what happened and what went wrong and what the faults were enables us to understand what actually happened, what went wrong, and what we can fix moving forward. It's a more constructive conversation. And so in that vein, today I'm going to talk to you about 3 stories of where I personally screwed up in the incident response process, how that impacted customers, and how the process could be changed or improved to make it better, and why and how we learned from those things. So when I'm talking about incident response, it basically boils down to the usual 3 things. You detect a thing happened, you contain the thing that happened, and then you remediate it. You fix it, make sure it doesn't happen again. The 3 stories that I'm talking about today, one from each of these categories, basically. One detection issue, one containment issue, one remediation issue. So, without further ado, chapter 1. Assumptions are very terrible. You never want to operate purely on assumptions. You want data, you want information, you want stuff backing you up. Quick background about this. So this customer setup, a customer that I was working on, they were a broker for billing. They did billing stuff. They had a website that people logged into, mainly for time tracking. People would use this as their daily thing. This is how they got their how they accounted for their time, got their money. It's a pretty important system, but it's a web front end for a database, basically. And this was how they configured their network. It was a flat network behind a firewall, pretty standard network setup. So as I'm looking at the firewall, I get a ticket. It's to do something on the firewall. I honestly can't remember what it was, but I get a call. Customer wants something. I start looking at the firewall rules, and normally firewall rules run into 3-ish categories. So the ones at the top, for anyone who is familiar with Cisco ACLs, these are ASA ACLs. So the first one is for general web hosting. Cool. You want your website accessible to the public and to the world. Great. HTTP, HTTPS, permitted, fine. Second category is not great. Second category is they want to be able to access some of their more sensitive stuff over some sensitive protocols. They want to RDP. They want to hit directly to the database server. Not great, but not the end of the world. It's at least locked down to an IP address. It's somewhat protected. It's fine. Usually at the end and the bottom of the list, there's the implicit deny, right? There's a statement that says, cool, if anything wasn't on this list, drop it. We don't care about that. It protects everything else. But this customer had something else. Yeah, it's a great one, right? So I noticed this. I noticed these kind of things because, yeah. So I note it. I put in the firewall ticket. I'm like, well, obviously the customer added this for a reason. There's a reason why this exists. They must be doing something that I can't see. I must not understand what else is going on here. So I put in the ticket. I say, hey, we can absolutely help you fix this. Let us know. Customer closes the ticket. Cool, job done. I'm out of here. Monday. 7:45 a.m. Website users start rolling on and coming online. About 7:45 a.m., we get the first reports that they're not really able to log into the system. It's weird. The website itself is up. So the home page is loading, which is cached from one of the servers, so it's being loaded properly. And the login page exists and gives you the right logic, but it doesn't let you log in. Nothing's actually happening. So we see that this is happening. We let the customer know. Customer sends out an alert to their customers saying, hey, we're having some problems. Give us a bit. We'll figure it out. Cool. 8 o'clock, 15 minutes later. Database people come online. They figure, OK, fine. It's a problem with the database probably, because the website's loading. It's just not logging in. So maybe it's not grabbing the database information. So they go to start looking into it. They try to connect via the SQL ports into the server, unresponsive. They ping the server, server's up. So it's working, but it's not responding properly. A couple minutes later, they try to RDP into the server for the first time. And bingo. Server's been taken over by ransomware. These, by the way, were Microsoft servers, not incredibly properly patched. And this is what they find. So this isn't the actual thing. This is an example. But generally, they find a banner that tells them on their RDP session, congratulations, your server's been owned. All of your data is encrypted. You have 48 hours to give us to get back to us with a Bitcoin transaction for, I think it was like $15,000 equivalent, or else it's going to all go bye-bye. So a couple minutes later, we contact the server team. We start looking into, great, we have this ransomware encrypted server. What do we do now? Right? So we've kind of missed the detection period. We've kind of missed the interaction. Now we're into response. How do we contain this? How do we remediate? So we talk to the server team and start asking about, cool, how do we get these back online? Because you've got three options, basically. You can pay the guys and hope that they give you your data back. But that comes with some caveats. You're not really sure if you're going to get your data back, because it might go to an address that's already been taken down. They might have already been captured by the feds. These things are all possible. There's no guarantee that putting a bunch of Bitcoin in a bank account is going to get you the data that you need. So it's risky. Option B is you can just flatten everything, go back to bare metal, and restore from the beginning. You can put a fresh database on. You can put a fresh copy of the server stuff on. You can do everything from scratch and bring it back up to spec, which works great if you've got Ansible playbooks, if you've got some sort of change management, which these guys had none of. And so it becomes a little harder, especially when you don't have good offsite backups and stuff. Or option three is generally you have a tape backup. Pretty much every day for every server company, they generally do tape backups of servers. So that's usually a good option. Is maybe you'll lose 24 hours of data, but if you go back to before a point in time where the attack happened, you restore it back to the original of what it was. So we decided that's probably the best course of action and the quickest to get back up and running. Some people might notice that some stuff is wonky, but not the end of the world. So we try to do that, but we realize that they don't actually have tape backups turned on. And instead, they're backing up, because they're a little cheap, to a local server. It's a Windows server that does an image of the device every 24 hours and then stores it for a period of time, which is fine, except yeah. So the backup server also got pwned. So do I have that on the next slide? Yeah. So the thing is, what happened, right, was the IP any at the bottom of the firewall rule list let everyone in the world to every port. And what was going on was, over the last couple weeks, a constant stream of RDP attempts was happening to all these servers. And they were just running through, trying credentials until they found one. And then eventually, they hit. They immediately infected that server. And as I learned from the talk this morning, 50% of outsider attacks immediately try to move laterally in the network. And so similarly, they moved laterally in the network. And because they had the same password on every single server, it was trivial to move to the next one. It's just the same RDP attack using the same passwords, moving to the next server, encrypting that as well, and moving on. So because there's no segmentation, because there's no division of credentials, because there's no isolation of these systems, this was able to spread within a matter of minutes. And we learned about the timeline of the attack because that's when they cleared the logs on the server. The logs were cleared sometime Sunday night, which is generally the first thing someone does when they get into a system because they don't want you to know what they've been doing. So one point on this as well is that this wasn't just because there was an IP any on the firewall. This wasn't just because they were all in the same segment. This wasn't just because they had the same password on all the devices. This is the combination of all the events. Typically, an incident isn't a single thing that went wrong. It's a chain of events that leads to a major issue. And so if any one of these things had been broken, if any one of these security things had been put in place, this would have been a very different conversation. This was years ago. Okay. Yeah, sorry. This pen's working, right? Yeah, whatever. So how did it get to this point? In talking to the company, it turned out that they, in reading of what the services that this company had offered for their hosting, for some reason thought that because they had purchased a firewall, they had purchased security services that go with the firewall. However, firewalls don't really work when you tell people to put the IP any permit at the end of the line. So basically, they had bought a security service, assumed that because they have a firewall, it's all secure, and then defeated the firewall itself in the process of setting it up. So not really effective. They believed that they were secure because they had the device, which led to them being a little bit more lax with their security posture. Like I said, I run the risk program or the information security risk program at Indeed. And one of the things that we talk about is risk homeostasis. There's this idea that if you introduce something new into the system that is supposed to protect people, they take a little bit more risky actions because they figure, I've got this new device that's there to catch me, I can be a little bit more risky. And so in kind of the same way, they had introduced this firewall. They thought that they were protected, and so they were a little bit more risky on what they were doing and what they were implementing. So just something interesting to point out. So Monday at 2, we meet with the company. We talk about the options in paying the ransom, and this is probably one of the most difficult conversations that I've had with the company, because the immediate reaction is, let's just pay the ransom, let's get it over with, let's make it happen. But the problem is twofold, right? There's the immediate problem that you might not get your stuff back, and you've wasted a bunch of money and a bunch of time. But there's the secondary problem that you're now encouraging this behavior. And as IT professionals, we want to take the path that not only is the best for us as a company, but the best for us as an industry. So we were able to talk with them and talk about alternate solutions. And we figured out that the best way that was guaranteed to get their information back, the best way to get their information back in a guaranteed way without encouraging these things in the future was we're going to spin up a couple new servers while these ones are being worked on. We're going to try to fix what's going on in the servers at themselves. We're not going to pay the ransom. And within a couple days, we'll have everything back up and running.
And you changed the firewall rule, right?
Immediately changed the firewall rule. Immediately changed the firewall rule. And as the new servers came online, there were randomized passwords that we put in place. So it took about 25 hours to get 2 new servers provisioned. Brand new flat servers, brand fresh and crisp, with the proper firewall rules in place and proper security and antivirus and a lot more things that we were trying to monitor. Wednesday, roughly the next morning, we actually found out that in looking at the database server, because we were starting to do some more forensics around it and figure out what was going on, if there was something we can salvage. Interesting about this specific ransomware strain is that it didn't encrypt any files that were over a gigabyte. And we think that was because that would spike the processor usage so much, and it would start alerting people that something was going on, and they wanted to run under the radar, so they only were processing files less than a gigabyte. So because the tables were stored in files themselves, and the files were over a gigabyte, we were actually able to save most of the tables from up to the point of compromise. So we grabbed the tables off the backup server, slid them into the new database server, and Thursday at 9 a.m., back to normal operation. So because of one, I won't say because solely of one firewall rule, but generally because of one firewall rule, this company lost 3 days of data, had to pay for their staff to basically be idle for 3 days because all their staff depended on these servers, and it was a service interruption to their customers. So lessons that we learned. So what can we learn from this? First, don't assume that just because you bought something that says security on the box means that it actually is secure. Investigate, figure out what it's doing, figure out what you're benefiting from it, if there are gaps filled in there. Doing a more comprehensive risk assessment of what you're doing and how it's impacting your network is always a good idea. And making sure you read all the fine print and making sure that you follow the recommendations. In the tickets, it turned out that we had recommended against putting in this IP anti-any rule, but they had wanted it for other reasons. VPNs are annoying. One of the reasons, by the way, was that the CEO wanted to get into it without a VPN from his home, which is super dumb. So it's annoying, but the problem is if you start doing these things that just for the sake of the CEO wants it, it's not really going to be a good idea. So the failure for us and the failure for the company was that we didn't properly explain the risk that was posed by this specific change. I was an EMT in a former life, and I believe very strongly in the idea of informed consent. That's when an EMT gives you a medication or does an intervention. They have to tell you all the counteractions, all the things that goes along with it. You have to be completely informed about what you're about to do. And I believe the same thing applies to IT and IT security, that if we're going to do something, we need to make sure that our users have informed consent, that they understand the implications of what we're doing and what they're asking for. And with Risk It Indeed, that's a lot of what we're doing is making sure that people are properly informed. And a lot of times, that's all we need to do to get them to back down from doing stupid stuff.
Do you have sign-offs?
Yeah, we do sign-offs, we do exceptions, we do the proper GRC stuff. Yeah. Admin credential reuse. One of the other big things that was really easy to solve is just having a unique admin password for each system. If you go to the extent that some of the larger hosting companies do, and you have passwords that rotate every 24 hours or central storage that you have to check things out of, like you don't really have to go to that level unless you feel like it. But at least having a unique password admin credential for each system will stop things from spreading as quickly as they did here.
How do you handle that in a domain environment?
Good question, and one that I really don't know, because I have been a Linux server admin for ages, and Windows is a black magic that I don't quite understand. And proper network segmentation is a good idea. I'm also a network admin, and network stuff is super important. Don't assume that having a flat network and firewall rules on all your systems is a good idea always. Try to segregate your systems by risk level, so higher risk stuff in one segment versus another. And logging and monitoring will be critical. This customer specifically is the reason I went out and custom devs them a IDS solution for them later on so that they could at least have some warning. Because just a bare basic IDS, just something running snort would have been enough to catch this sort of thing, give them some preliminary warning. Yeah, and the customer got lucky. It could have been a lot worse. It could have exfiltrated all their data. It could have stolen it somewhere else. In this case, it just encrypted it. But yeah, they got lucky. This is the last add-on to the slide if you want to take pictures, by the way. Cool. All right, chapter 2. Documentation is kind of important. It's something that we generally don't do very well as IT people, or at least we try to do it well, and we typically fail. I know I have in the past, and this is a story about that. So a DDoS, distributed denial of service attack, is basically a whole bunch of people or a whole bunch of systems that are all hammering the same single IP address over a short period of time or longer periods of time. Basically, it's a bunch of people want to access a server and it overloads the resources of that server. So it's distributed, so it's not really easy to pinpoint a single IP address or a single source. It's really hard to nail it down. Which means you can't really identify where it's coming from. So it's hard to block it and hard to filter it out because it's constantly changing, constantly evolving. So really the best advice that we have for people under DDoS attacks is just wait. They can't last forever. Typically websites are back up within a couple hours because people only pay for a couple hours of DDoSing of services. These services, the big botnets, that you pay by the hour to have a DDoS something, and typically within a couple hours it's back up. And so if you do nothing, it's fine. So in a shared hosting environment, DDoS isn't just impacting the customer, it's impacting adjacent customers. The great thing about a shared hosting environment is that you're spreading the costs of expensive stuff over larger groups of customers, but the trade-off is that you're now sharing those resources. So if those resources are getting overloaded, it could impact you as well as the customers getting attacked. So a DDoS that affects one customer in a chain or a network chain could also impact other customers that are also using the same services. So to combat that, when I was working at this particular company, the policy was identify the targeted customer of a DDoS, contact the customer, make sure that they're aware of the situation, that they know what's going on, recommend them DDoS protection, which was super expensive, like prohibitively expensive. It was not that bad if you bought it ahead of time, like I might need this eventually, I'm going to pay a little bit up front, but it was basically highway robbery if you actually needed it in the moment and needed it turned on, and people paid. So at the end, if the customer didn't respond or declines the protection, and the DDoS is impacting other customers, then we null route the IP. And null route basically means we drop the traffic at the edge, never makes it to the server. Edge router is a little bit more able to handle the load, and typically the rest of the customers never see it. So it's an effective mitigation solution for people that don't want to buy that protection. Quick note, and I'm going to talk more about documentation in a second. So this was a general overview of what the ticketing system looked like. Interesting things, so it gave you information, gave you links to other things about the customer, and one of the things that it had was a giant red account notes section at the top, which is super useful for putting notes in and doing things. However, the account notes were text, and it wasn't even formatted text, it was just a blob of text. And we'll see why that's a problem in a second. So. Attack starts. 15 minutes later, our monitoring systems pick it up. It notes that there's high interface utilization. It triggers an alert. I get tagged. I go investigate. I get to the firewall, and there's a lot of connections going on. There's a lot of stuff happening. It's basically a SYN flood. It's a bunch of SYNs with ACKs or SYN ACKs going back out, but no ACKs coming in. So it's overloading the connection table. Firewall's coping fine at the moment. Nothing is down. It's OK. I'll leave it alone. The alert triggered a ticket. I update the ticket saying what I found, close ticket, done. 10 minutes later, one of their websites start going down. So the attack is increasing in size, increasing in complexity. It's getting a little bit bigger. Their website is not responding. It triggers an alert. I figure out who the contact is on the customer's account. There's usually like a primary contact they want us to contact in times of emergency and things like that. So I send a ticket, I send an email, I call them on the voicemail. Doesn't help, then I'm a US guy who's trying to help a UK customer, but the time zone is an issue. I leave a voicemail, I update the ticket, I tell them what's going on. It's still not, it's not a big enough issue at the moment that it's impacting anyone else. Only their website is down, so if they're not troubled enough to respond to the ticket, I'm not troubled enough to do anything else about it. Hour and a half into the attack, customers in adjacent cabinets start to see problems, start to see network slowness. The routers are starting to have problems handling the traffic, and it's starting to have that cascading effect of now other customers are being impacted. There's no response still from the primary contact. All their websites are down at this point. Their firewall is completely overloaded. It's pretty much borked. So we go into our SOP for DDoS. Great. So number one, we've identified the targeted customer. We've got the IP address that's targeted. We've contacted them. We've tried to contact them at least. Over email, over voicemail. We've tried multiple ways to get in touch with them. We've recommended DDoS protection in the voicemail and the emails, but they haven't responded. DDoS is impacting other customers. We can't really wait for one customer to respond because there are multiple other customers that are being impacted. It's not really fair to the other customers that one customer is causing all these issues when we have the ability to make lives better for them. So I take the decision, I go into the router, I null route the IP, update the ticket, close ticket, problem solved, right? Attack stops, traffic returns normal, all the monitoring clears, except for the website that's null routed because now the IP address is unreachable, but that's to be expected. Like 5 hours later, the guy calls in, hopping mad, because he wants to know why the DDoS mitigation that he had purchased for his account wasn't applied in the DDoS attack. So I'd gone through. I had read the account notes. I had looked. There was 2 places to look for it. There's the account notes and there's devices, because it's marked as a device if it's a DDoS mitigation. It was in neither. I could find it in neither of these places. And then I go back and I reread the account notes. And hidden in a subparagraph of a thing in the bottom of the thing was, oh yeah, and by the way, he has DDoS mitigation. So in my reading of it, I had read all the account notes and I had missed one sentence that said that the DDoS mitigation was in place. Customer's account manager confirms that he has DDoS mitigation, even though it's not listed as a device, it's just in the account notes, and that they bought the protection plan. 15 minutes later, I take out the null route, put in the DDoS mitigation, attacks no longer impacting the other customers, and their websites are back online. The next day, the New York Times reports on this outage that I had caused. Which, by the way, is a fantastically butt-puckering moment that you have a national newspaper that is now reporting on something that was completely your fault. So this is basically it. I slightly redacted and changed, but this is basically what appeared in the Times. And it caused some issues. The customer had some reputation loss. There were some issues. Going back to the problem, though, right? The problem wasn't that the customer hadn't bought the right things. The problem wasn't that the customer had done anything wrong. The problem was that our own text had set us up for failure. We had not properly documented it in a way that would be easy to see and easy to recognize. Especially in the heat of the moment, you've got a ton of information that you need to process very quickly, and it's very hard or very easy to miss those small details. Right. When we talk about if anyone's done any like combat training or things like that, you talk about how in the heat of the moment you lose the fine motor skills. It's the gross actions that you rely on. And in the same way, incident response, you lose that ability to read the fine details and you're down to just the headlines. You're looking for what applies to me in the moment. You're looking for what is that immediate action I need to take. And because it was buried in the bottom, it was completely missed, which is something that airline pilots also experience. As also an instrument-rated pilot, this is what I experience whenever I go flying. This is called a NOTAM list. And for each airport and every airspace you go through, you get a piece of paper this long with all what they call notice to airmen, of all the things that you need to read and be aware of on your path and on your flight. And it's long, because it's a legal document. There's a lot of stuff in there, but of all these pages and pages of stuff, there are maybe 2 notices that you need to be aware of. This is the reason that an Allegiant jet, I think last year, took off and flew to a closed airport because there was a NOTAM for it that they had missed in their briefing. And for that reason, they flew to a closed airport, which is kind of a no-no for commercial airlines. So the problem with the FAA that they're trying to fix with this is how do we make it stand out more when something matters? And in the same way, we as IT professionals need to make sure that our documentation is clear and consistent. Large blocks of text, things that are easily recognizable, things that will stand out in the heat of the moment are way more useful than super detailed instructions. Even if it's 5 bullet points with 6 words each, just outlining where to find more information, just give us that roadmap of here's where you need to go with stuff. Document should be consistently updated. One of the other problems was that it was a new process that they were adding it as a device on these accounts as this DDoS mitigation, which is another thing that we should look for, but it was an older customer. They hadn't updated it yet. So documentation needed to be updated for this customer to make sure that was in there. So making sure that your documentation is updated will keep things rolling and keep things consistent. And then another thing that helps is frequent tabletop exercises. If we had done a tabletop exercise with this customer, maybe I would have noticed that, hey, we should probably put DDoS mitigation somewhere else. Maybe we should make it bolder. And this was my recommendation coming off of that incident in my what did I call it? The blame-free retrospective. Sorry. Small brain fart, end of the day. In my blame-free retrospective that I was leading, I came up with we should probably do tabletops. We should look at this process. We should make sure that people are properly trained so that when this comes up again, we have more consistent actioning and we have more consistent documentation. This last bullet point if anyone wants to take a picture. Cool. All right, last story. Chapter 3. So, customer's a vendor. You get into this weird point with some resellers where you're kind of a third-party customer of the customer, or a customer of a customer. Your person that you actually host for, like the person you have the contracts with, is a reseller, and they contract with you to provide servers, and so you're just you're at the end of the chain. And in this case, they were a reseller that did websites for products, specifically children's products, like message boards. Yeah, I can't really give an example without getting too much away, but. It's like a message board to interact with brand ambassadors. And so kids would be interacting with this thing, posting user-generated content, that sort of thing. They demanded the customer's client, so our customer's client, the person they were creating the websites for, had very specific demands about what they needed to be put in place, because they, rightly so, wanted to protect their stuff. So they wanted a firewall, they wanted an IDS, and they wanted website monitoring. The customer, our guys, decide, I don't really want to do a standard deployment. I want to do something different. So first, as a refresher, an IDS, an intrusion detection system, is a device that monitors incoming network traffic and looks for patterns of attacks, looks for anomalies, anything that's out of place. It's super useful for detecting attacks, SQL injections, anything that's a common vulnerability. It's a good first line of defense. It's non-invasive. If you're thinking about what's the best way to up my protection from a standard firewall, this is probably your first stop. So for the IDS, the usual way that you want to deploy an IDS is you want to deploy it behind the firewall. So the reason for this is that the firewall is designed to stop the majority of attacks that are coming. It's going to stop all the things that there are no open ports for. It's going to do some filtering for you. It's going to do a good job of filtering a lot of stuff out. It might not do a lot of actual alerting or reporting, but it's working. How you know it's working is by putting the IDS behind it. And now you know you're only getting stuff that actually made it through the firewall. So stuff that actually went through that first barrier of protection that's actually making it to your server, which reduces the amount of noise that you get. Because otherwise, if, like the customer, you want to do this, with the IDS in front of the firewall, now you get every single attack that's coming to the firewall, even if it gets blocked, even if it's the dumbest ping of death that you've ever seen, that every firewall since the 2000s has blocked. Like, you're going to get those alerts. And that's going to overload things and make it complicated. That's what the customer wanted, because they wanted to see everything, which makes sense, but not really. So, day one. IDS has been up for 5 minutes, right? There's an attack. We report it to the customer. And the way that they wanted this to happen was they wanted us to open a ticket for every attack, which is fine. We're billing them for service. It's OK. The customer wants to investigate. And then once they report an all clear, we close the ticket. Cool. So we do exactly that. We open the ticket. We tell them what we found. They investigate. A couple hours later, they close the ticket. 25 minutes later, attack number 2 happens again. Again, we report, they investigate, close ticket. I think you see a pattern here. So this continues to happen. Within 2 hours, they're already not reporting all clear. They're already getting fatigued from the alerts that we're generating within 2 hours of turning this device on. We asked them, are you sure? Do you really want to leave it there? Do you really want to keep it in this location? They're like, yep, it's fine. Even if we don't respond, just go ahead and close the ticket. I know, I feel it, yeah. So eventually the process is, IDS detects an attack, opens the ticket automatically, we investigate, report it back to the customer. Customer usually doesn't respond. Sometimes they will if it's something that we'll put a little bit more emphasis on. Maybe we investigate and there's something actually happened. But generally, within 48 hours, they just close the ticket. So we get a ticket. Way later. IDS opens a ticket, we investigate, report to customer. Customer doesn't respond. 48 hours later, close the ticket. Standard process. Except, customer opens another ticket. This time, something actually happened. It was an SQL injection. It got into their system. It caused havoc. And they are livid that their customer's client's website has now been hacked and are demanding to know why our IDS didn't stop it. So they want to know why we didn't stop it. We point back to ticket 1. We're like, hey, we told you about this. We said that this was a problem, and yet you did nothing. So we work with them. We roll back. The root cause of it was that there's no rate limiting on it, so you can do injection attacks and credential stealing to your heart's content. And we tell them about this problem. The problem is that the customer is back to that checkbox mentality of, I have an IDS, I have a firewall, therefore I'm secure, even though we just proved that it wasn't. So they tell their client that the problem was our IDS didn't pick it up. Our IDS didn't solve the problem. So instead of taking accountability for the actual issue, instead of fixing the problem, they put it on our equipment that failed, which works fine for a bit. A bit. 5 more times this happens. And every time we go back into a retrospective where to the customer's benefit, I guess, it's just us and the customer, because we can't involve the client. It's a third party. We can't breach our customer's confidentiality. If they want to blame it on us, that's kind of up to them, until the customer actually knows what's going on. So the customer gets a report of actual root cause was, immediately fires the customer, and within about 30 days, they go out of business. So I, on the one hand, want to be slightly jubilant that their bad behavior wasn't rewarded. However, at the same time, this is a customer of ours. Like, this was a customer that we were trying to support. We were there to give the best effort of, here's how to solve it, here's how to make your stuff better. So it to me feels like a failure that we weren't able to do that. And that's another, that's a failure of the response process, in my opinion. In this case, probably what we should have done was more outreach, more assistance on, like, here's the specific problem in your code, here's what's going on, let's talk to you a little bit more about it. I mean, we tried, but I always feel like there could have been more that could have been done. So, lessons learned. The big first thing out of here And the reason why we put the IDS behind the firewall is all alerts should always be actionable. So whenever you get an alert in, if the default action is to deny or is to ignore that it happened, if you have a chatty alert that happens a lot, it's probably not giving you a lot of value. Because if that alert is so chatty that it's constantly firing and not actually alerting you to a problem, then when that problem happens, you're going to be conditioned, like the customer was, to automatically think, oh, this is nothing. This is just another white noise. This is more that noise that I can just ignore. I don't need to do anything about this. So the recommendation from best practices really is make sure that anytime you have an alerting set up, it's always a positive. It's something that your person actually has to do something, has to perform some sort of action. Even if it's ultimately a false positive, there's some action associated with it that does an investigation. It's never filter to the spam box and never deal with it. Zero blame retrospectives are super helpful. In this process, a lot of the blame was, rightly or wrongly, put on the customer because it was the customer's fault that their code was bad. It was the customer's fault that this network was designed in such a way that it led to a lot of these false negatives. But in attempting to communicate with the customer, it was always perceived as this adversarial us versus them sort of thing. And in taking that into a corporate environment, into places where you guys probably work, that, again, doesn't really work well. If it's always someone trying to cover their butt, someone trying to not get blamed for a thing, you're not going to have a good experience with it, and you're not going to get to the root cause of the problem. So by having a zero blame retrospective, you're able to actually dive into what happened and get to the root cause of the problem, and everyone feels better for it afterwards. You're able to actually gain information and insight out of it. Yeah, and of course, compliance for compliance sake is not the right solution. The customer's client had demanded that they have a firewall and IDS and web monitoring, but the customer had set it up in such a way that it wasn't actually working. It wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. Talking back about checkbox compliance again, compliance is great for sales. It's great for getting out there and saying, cool, I've got a SOC 2 compliance audit now. I've got HIPAA compliance. It's all fine. But if that doesn't actually work, if you have the device so you can check the box for HIPAA, but it doesn't actually protect you against any attacks, it's not actually providing any risk reduction. It's not actually going to help you in situations where you might be under attack. And that's honestly the biggest threat to companies isn't necessarily that you'll become non-compliant for HIPAA, it's that your data is going to get lost. It's the cost of a breach is going to bring you down. It's you're going to become the next Equifax. That reputation loss, that needing to pay out to people is the larger problem of the two. And so that's generally where you should be focusing your effort on where do we actually get risk reduction. And if that happens to result in HIPAA compliant systems, then great, it's a bonus. So I just want to highlight a couple key takeaways because that was the last of my 3 stories.
Can you go back one more real quick?
Yeah, sorry. Cool. So I just want to emphasize again, checkbox security is not security. Defense in depth is good. Design experts are good. Having an incident response plan, we've talked this entire time assuming that you've got an incident response plan. However, I have worked for companies where that didn't exist. I have had to build incident response plans from the ground up. And so starting with a tabletop exercise is usually a really good starting point. If you don't have an incident response plan already, start by gathering all your tech people in one place and ask the question, great, so this just happened. How do we respond? And watching it crumble. And by doing that, you'll start to understand where the failure points and the break points are, and you will start to naturally come up with an incident response plan. It'll probably look like any other incident response plan in the world because that's what you got to do. So having a plan, following the plan, having it clearly documented is super critical to being able to respond properly to incidents. And then the last point, like I said, and I've been trying to emphasize, is make sure that every mistake is a learning opportunity. When I made that mistake that ended up in the New York Times, I wasn't fired. I was given the opportunity to lead a team and do some process improvement within the company to make sure that it wasn't happening again. It's very costly for a company to experience these mistakes, but the people responsible usually aren't It's usually not from malice. It's from negligence or mistraining or something else. It's not necessarily their fault. So when this happens, the best opportunity is for training. It's for education. It's for using it as a case study for everyone else in the company, making sure that you're able to take that case study out there and present it without blame coming back on them. And if that means anonymizing them a little bit, if that means maybe scrubbing their stuff a little bit, it means presenting it as a case study from another company even. These are all ways and opportunities to make a internal mistake not attributable to a single person and provide some of that same ability to learn from it. So that's it. This is me, if you want any of that stuff. I think we're about 15 minutes early, which is perfect. So we've got some time for questions, comments, concerns, general musing about life, or there's a door for beer, I think, outside. All these things are possible. Thanks.
Yeah, quick question. I want to know if I'm fooling myself. I decided that I two-factored all of my public-facing RDPs.
Mm-hmm.
Am I safer, or do I need to do something else?
So actually, I really like two-factor auth is a great starting point, right? If you just have 2FA on RDP, it's a good way to stop the ransomware that we saw at least. It definitely would have stopped it dead in its tracks, because even if it got that valid login credential, there was still that second factor that kicked in that would keep it from actually getting any bite and getting any hold. You're still having the problem where you now have something directly accessing your website and your systems over an open port, which, if there's a vulnerability on that port, could lead to compromise if there's a problem with the underlying protocol. If that service isn't updated and there's something wrong with it, there's still some opportunities. One option I really like, and I actually like this more than a VPN, is F5 has a product called the APM, the application. I can't remember what the PM stands for, but it's basically a proxy manager, maybe? Anyway. It's a proxy for your applications for a lot of the things that you want to do. It enforces the 2FA. It requires login. You can do authentication to a third-party service like OneLogin or Duo or something like that. And it provides an encrypted tunnel for that, so that when you communicate over that protocol, you're interfacing with that device first. And if you don't pass that challenge, then you don't get to the endpoint. So I like, especially for web services, that kind of process. And I think in at least one of my companies, we've basically eliminated the need for a VPN by using that and just opening everything up. I'm sorry? RDP gateway with two-factor is a good option, yeah. Questions? Cool. Well, I appreciate it. If you have any questions, I'm available, and I'll be giving the Docker for Dummies talk tomorrow. So, yeah.
Can you show that second summary again?
Second summary? Yeah.